Hi again.
Oh.
So, to talk about the opening sequence of Aileen. So, as you've got in your booklets, these are kind of constructed in the ways that exam questions might be. There tends to be quite frequently ones about the difference between fiction and watching documentary. Should we start with that?
Yeah, let's do that.
So, in terms of the opening sequence, various things that can be suggested is that I've asked the question with you lot in terms of, are you entertained? And that's something that I think people forget, is that it's something that comes from documentary, similar to when you're watching fiction, in that you are entertained. However, quite rightly, some of you pointed out that entertainment, however, is coming from the fact that this is real. And within those first 5 minutes, the facts are very clear through the stock footage, through the fast-paced editing of that sequence of the crime scene, etc., and the news reports, is that she's guilty of those killings. I've forgotten my train of thought.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's quite interesting, going back a little bit, because I agree with that, but I think also what's quite interesting in the 2013, am I right in saying? 20.
You know it better than me.
Check my versions. One was 93, wasn't it? The original. And I think the remake, just double checking.
2001.
Might have to cut this bit. 1993 was The Selling of a Serial Killer. Yeah, and then I think you're right. I think it was then. 2003. 2003. Yeah. Apologies. It's interesting because this, although it's a standalone film, I think if you knew about the original, you might be better placed in the first sort of opening minutes to understand what's going on. Because I felt a little bit, I don't know how you felt a little bit of confusion at first, which is similar sometimes to fiction film, where you need to kind of settle down and get finely tuned in to kind of seeing what's happening. Yeah. And I did feel a bit of that until, as you say, all the facts and everything were presented. Yeah. So that has a similarity in some respects sometimes, doesn't it? But
definitely.
Sometimes it helps to see the first film. Yeah. If you know.
You mean, for example, if you were watching a sequel? Yeah. Yeah.
And this was essentially a sequel in documentary terms, I suppose. So there is that similarity a little bit, maybe. That sometimes you can get lost a little in the narrative until things are finally placed in front of you. Yeah, and
because it is quite fast-paced and it's very informative, in terms of. Maybe a difference from fiction is that you get a lot of information within a very fast-paced time of a small period of time, and that we were talking about, it could be quite similar to a thriller in certain ways if we were looking at what kind of genre it might be like. And it's got that detective music playing, the non-diegetic music and things like that, and it's an investigation as such. In that within a thriller you might not get that kind of opening where you're given lots of facts and figures and information and introduced to the killer straight away, all those different kind of things. That there's a different kind of experience here, that you might be slowly introduced to the situation if you were watching fiction, whereas that's maybe not the case within documentaries in general, but clearly not in this one.
And I think from a spectator point of view, because of that, you really have to sort of concentrate and focus. And there are certain films, fiction films as well, that really make you think, aren't they? But you have to absorb those. They're not facts, but you have to absorb the narrative of those quite quickly to kind of to be engaged. And you can imagine, depending on the situation in which you're watching this film, both groups watch this, as an academic experience and essentially individually were taking notes. But you have to ask yourself, would you see the film maybe the same way if you were watching it with different people? So if you're watching it with your mates at home, would you be so attentive maybe? And from a spectator point of view, that can really change things, can't it? Where you watch it and with whom can really change your opinion on ideas and values and things. So it's quite an interesting one. There's quite a lot of parallels, but obviously some differences that fit within that.
And I think, because having taught this film for 2 years now, is the response that within the setting of watching it within the classroom, I think there's actually less empathy for her. I think at certain times, because of maybe quite graphic information, sexual information, there is certain, a bit of laughter or uncomfortableness maybe because the teachers in the room, or with you being with your peers and hearing that kind of thing, is that there's possibly a less kind of less identification with Aileen because of that reason. These are ideas that not necessarily, it might not be what you agree with. If not, that's absolutely fine. but always remember to support your ideas with examples.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just to echo that, this is about spectator response, and we're all individually reading this. Some of these ideas may be linked up, and we may come to a collective, but ultimately it can be about how people feel at the time and all of that. So I suppose it does very much relate, doesn't it, to this whole idea about your background would be important, where you sort of like brought up. So you have to ask yourself first of all, I suppose, whether if you were an American spectator within this, would you feel differently maybe to British, or does that not matter? Does that not have any bearing? If you were, for example, if you had a particularly bad childhood, would that have an impact on you more? Would you have that sense of kind of, I refer to it in my group as like a parasocial interaction, a connection with a possible person or issue, because you've experienced something similar. So it could be that, couldn't it? Or it could be, gender. Is this a gender issue? Don't want to split into gender, but may always feel differently to females in this.
Those are the debates to consider, that you can, within an answer, you can explore that, those responses that you've discussed in class. So shall we kind of look forward to the different responses that people did have to the opening sequence? I think we can kind of go back to talk about the entertainment, in that you were entertained, and that part of that was the fact that it's got stock footage and we know it's real. There's factual information provided, but also that there is a story created, and that there's narrative enigma there through the black and white still image and the handwriting of Eileen's name, which we presume is actually what she wrote as a child, and he's taken that and put it in. Starting with that, it creates enigma as to how very quickly we've ended up in this murder scene of multiple murders. And somebody in the class, I can't remember who, I will start to mention names further in, mentioned, because those murders took place in 1 year, and so the fast pace really kind of mirrors that these events have very quickly escalated from what looks like a normal innocent child to becoming a serial killer. So there's engagement there through the construction and entertainment provided in the way that it is constructed. Yeah,
absolutely. And then of course it then moves, and there's a piece to camera, I think, then, isn't there, which then is focused upon. Which then, am I right in saying we talk about how the audio recording is heard, and we see the courtroom and all of that kind of unfold, don't we? Well, not too far ahead.
That's a bit too far ahead.
Too far ahead, okay. But yeah, interesting how all of that kind of sort of pans out, I suppose, and how you feel and how you're positioned to feel is important at this stage.
Yeah. And I think as we discussed in class, it's important to remember that at this point it might not be sympathy that you do feel for Aileen at this point, because we've had the cold hard facts of what she's done. However, he very quickly positions you to start to question those facts by saying in the voiceover, she's the most honest person in the case. And that's how that within 5 minutes we're already being told how to think about her.
It's a hook line essentially, isn't it?
It is,
just as
narrative hook.
Just within the similarities of fiction, you're hooked in then to that narrative. And because it's documentary, you often think documentaries are truth, and they are sort of they speak from a position of power, and you think about how that kind of works. And we talked about David Attenborough in the past, what he says, that kind of voice of God, I think it's referred to, isn't it? And these things sometimes do sit with us more, because you think, well, that's a person of authority, because they're the documentary maker, and so therefore it must be true. Indeed.
I think that kind of covers it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
that's good.
We won't waffle on anymore.
No.